Hey everybody, I'm the Bat Otter, and I'm here with Ghost Machine number 1. Now, if you're not familiar with Ghost Machine, don't worry, you're not alone. Ghost Machine is an imprint, as it seems, made by some of the top talent in the comic book industry at this moment. Here are all the names: Jeff Johns, Gary Frank, Brian Hitch, lots of artists. I think Tomasi's a writer, Johns is a writer, I know that for sure. Francis Manipul doubles as a writer and artist. But the interesting part of this is, if you read this pitch here, it says, we believe in two vital principles. First, great comics come from great characters. And second, equity comes from true artistic ownership. Now, I don't know what they're spouting on about. They're using a lot of big words. They might be hurting themselves. But the premise of Ghost Machine is that it's new stories in comic books that are independent of DC Marvel, that are their own stories, new original ideas for stories that are going to be published in shared universes. And that's not a bad idea. What's even better is that this book gives you all, I believe it's 6 of the stories. But where I was bamboozled is it's not actually much of anything. They're cold opens for these stories, and they're bios for the characters. This is a book that is trying to sell you on the idea of shared universes and these characters. It's a big opening. I thought the comic book industry finally came up with a good idea, in that this Ghost Machine imprint was going to be a umbrella term for books that will have all of these characters published in one. No, it turns out this is an advertisement for the standalone series that will be Geiger, Rook, and Redcoat. Which, hey, fair play, good advertising, good material. That's a good idea to sell these magazines, boost sales. But at the same time, each one of them is going to cost $5. So if you just wanted to buy these 3, you'd be short $15. Which, I mean, come on, nobody wants to spend $15 on comic books, much less these soft issues. So, getting into it, I thought, okay, well, I've never read Rook or Geiger or any of these books before. Let me give them a shot. Whew. And let me tell you guys, this is... I call these made-for-TV comic books because when you realize the way that they're structured and the way that the characters talk and the way that the plots act and the way that the comic books are expressed to you in the pages, it's very much, I want this to be a TV show above all else. And you might say, well, how in the world is this guy a TV show? Well, because in the TV show, he's going to look like that most of the time. I thought, wow, that's a really cool design. Oh, wait, he almost never looks like that. So in a TV show, he's all hooded, cheap budget. And I tell you, this is Jeff Johns. Everybody raves about Jeff Johns. And to be quite honest, I've never quite understood it. He's always been a good, passable writer, but he's never done anything necessarily phenomenal, in my opinion, that really drives you to him. So if you guys think I'm just talking, let me give you an example. Let's read these pages here. This guy is a radioactive person and his family died, and he's gonna kill who we will later find out is Radioactive Knight. And he says, wait, I can help you find a cure. And he says, okay, talk, but if I don't like what you say, my dog takes your throat. And the guy says, good doggy. Does that not sound weird? Is that not odd dialogue or writing? Look at the position that this guy has drawn, and Gary Frank is a really good illustrator. That's not... listen. That's just one. And what ends up happening in the dialogue here, and I'll try not to show every single page of every single page, but then this tough, crazy, lunatic kind of guy says, oh, sorry, I meant wolf. He's a wolf. Or wolves. God, stop stumbling. It just doesn't work. The way that the characters are illustrated, the way that they look, doesn't match the way that they're talking. They're talking like quirky TV characters in an evening show that's being pitched on ABC, is what they speak like and how they act like. It's not at all what they look like, but that's how they're speaking and acting. And again, easy design. These are easy designs to replicate. It's barren wasteland. And you get these cool cool shots from Gary Frank. Now I have nothing stopping me from being the monster they say I am. Thanks for showing and not telling. A lot of this reads like somebody is explaining to you the story as you're reading it. And that's just not good. That's boring. That's uninteresting. And he's looking for a cure, but he wants to fight these people. The direction is just very without direction, if that makes any sense. So, up next, we immediately have the introduction of Redcoat. And Redcoat, as you can see on the cover, is, well, a guy in a red coat. And going from reading this really, really strange canned dialogue that's just narration from the characters speaking directly to you, the reader, terrible idea. You have one of the coolest openers that I've read in a while, and that is, I was born on the 13th of July, year 1749, but I haven't aged a day since 1776. Gotta say, really good opener, really good one-liner to start this guy's character off with, and then you get a really interesting splash page of the guy fighting through these armies, and you get what looks to be George Washington holding a glowing sword surrounded by lightning, borderline looking like Thor, and this guy leading the charge of redcoats and surrounded by what is presumably the Revolutionary Army of America at the time. And I think, hey, that's a really cool thing. Then he starts talking, and I thought, oh, well, here comes the weird dialogue. So just, for example, you get recognizable people through history. Look, it's Annie Oakley. Look, it's some black guy from the Civil War. Look, it's, he's called the Northerner. Now, all these are based on real people, Davy Crockett. I don't know who this man is based on. They don't say a name. But you can kind of read their characters from the way they are. Here's Benedict Arnold. Here's young Einstein. And I think, oh, great. And let me show you how this reads. Is Einstein. I met the little extortionate. Talk about not being able to read. In fall of 1892, back when he was unlocking how the world worked. And I apologize if the camera isn't focusing. It doesn't want to focus. Why, yes, Mr. Pure, I am blackmailing you. Now teach me all about magic. Or Annie Oakley, he says, oh, she's the only person who ever shot me in the head without repercussion. I deserved it. You hear the way these things read? You see what I'm saying about these are the evening shows on ABC that are made by a room of writers that are writing the most generally accepted dialogue and characters. They're not characters, they're caricatures. They're not people acting in a story, they are stories acting through the people. It really just doesn't work. And they explain the premise is that this guy's immortal, he goes throughout time, obviously, and he's some way or another connected to Geiger, the green guy, and they are also connected to Junkyard Joe, and as you continued in Geiger and Redcoat this April. So the interesting part is, I don't have any problem with the premise. I don't have any problem with any of those things. It's just, again, the way that it's written, the way that it's scripted, it's made for TV comic books at the end of the day. In these two cases. Now let's get on to Rook, because I don't really have an interest in this. This is what you give to the production team, the writer's room. Here's the elevator pitch. It's the unnamed fighting the unknown war for a great evil. It's as vague as you can get it, so that way any screenwriter can insert their own ideas into it. And while you have these cool shots of Geiger and these generally interesting looking characters, you know that that's not what they're made for. And while it sounds a little harsh, I would classify it as dishonest writing, in that they're not writing you a comic book. Not in that they're lying to you or they're deceiving you or they're being malicious of sorts. Just in that honestly writing an over-the-top story in a comic book is not something they're setting out to do. And they are trying to sell you a comic book, but in my opinion, it's not that. I don't believe that that's what this is. And to be quite honest, it's not that interesting. While you have all these good ideas and these good characters that you could do in an over-the-top manner, you're not doing them like that. And I think that's a bit of a disappointment. Now, next up in the book is Rook Exodus. And like I said, I'm not trying to show all the pages. I know that if I am, that's a mistake on my end. But you have a really cool introduction. with these characters. I wasn't too sold on the story, but when you look at the artwork and Brad Anderson's coloring as well as Jason Fabok's line work, he's gone a lot more back into traditional artwork in that he's doing it with pen and ink. And I've got to say, not only has he improved a lot, but he seems to thrive much better without being held back by the superhero medium that is Marvel and DC Comics. When you look at these backdrops, you look at the animals, you look at the scenery, the birds, all these different things, Jason Fabok is really shining. And there's still some corny dialogue here and there. I believe Jeff Johns is writing most of these. I'm not sure how involved he is in the dialogue, the scripting process. But, I mean, forget the dialogue in this one. It's good. The characters speak like characters. And the good thing about Rook is that the characters are not speaking to you. They're speaking to each other, and you're piecing the story together as it goes. And there's a very clear and direct narrative. Whereas in the other one, it's a very open-ended, vague pitch of these are the characters and they can do a lot of things, whereas these are the characters and this is what they are doing, and this is what you can look forward to them doing, where they're fighting animals, they're crashing into waterfalls. And I tell you, I turned to this page and I said wow. I verbally expressed the word wow to myself because of the landscape. Again, Brad Anderson is just shining on the colors. He's an excellent, phenomenal colorist, on par with Alex Sinclair. But I think even Alex Sinclair wouldn't be able to do this scene justice with the amount of detail that Fabok provides to capture the expansive nature of this landscape that is being portrayed here. I think this is one of the coolest splash pages we've seen from Jason Fabok in a while. And especially very competent compositions. It's very well put together artwork. And while the story is actually in itself interesting, these helmets, they can control the animals that the helmets are based on. She controls wolves, the other guy controls boars, the lead character controls crows and birds. Interesting premises. You have a lot of cool ideas that you can tell Jason Fabok wants to work together. He probably did this with a bunch of D&D characters he made up, and I think his D&D experience might actually pay off in writing this book because of all the moving parts that these characters can play around with. So I think out of all the books in this book, this is one of the best ones. Next, you have Francis Manipul's The Rockefellers, which is about a future family living in the present. And while honestly, again, it's some more made-for-TV dialogue. If you look at the first page, he says, "All right, who wants some burgers? Plant-based for me, Dad." That kind of dialogue. But I did enjoy the way that he drew the comic book. Like I said, all these artists, this is the best work I've seen from them in years. Francis Manipul had a really solid Flash run. I think the colors were too undersaturated in that run, and I think even reading the New 52 seemed to be the start of comic books being written for TV and being written to appeal to that audience and in that style. And again, I have to say, that's not the way to go, guys. The way to go with comic books is to write good comic books. Use over-the-top dialogue. Use over-the-top compositions like what Francis Manipul is doing here. Don't use basic, boring concepts and colors. Use stuff that you can only use in comic books. And I think these compositions here show how much Francis Manipul has grown since The Flash. And the use of color, the use of dynamic angles and composition and panels. Most people use just square panels these days. I think even though the story here was a little underwhelming, the way that the characters interact with each other felt so genuine and so real. And it's accompanied by this very, very perfect art style for expressing the nature and the relationships of these characters. I think that out of all the books that I would have otherwise found boring, Francis Manipul found a way to not only write these characters well and make the characters feel alive and unique to one another, but he did an even better job at using artwork to better express those relationships. And I think it shows you how much he's grown as an artist. This one is Halo and Hornsby, about two kids who he's the angel and she's a devil, and they fight. And this kid is neglected by his parents because he's forced to walk home since he didn't have a home run. And it have you guys ever seen The Book of Life? Is that the movie where the angel and the devil make a deal and people have to watch them. That's what's happening here. It's kind of boring. Now, it closes out with Ivan Reyes' edition. It seems like it was a last-minute addition to Ghost Machine. Maybe they just want to hit the 64-page count called Hyde Street. And it starts off another But then whenever you actually read it and the story goes along, well, they might actually have you. Because, again, Ivan Reyes, phenomenal artist. I believe it's still Brad Anderson on colors. Beautiful, beautiful work across these pages. And what you find out is it's going to be some classic, I'm not going to show every page, thing of, it's the Twilight Zone. It's the Twilight Zone, but a comic book. And I think, well, what better medium to put a Twilight Zone-esque theme into than a medium where you can do anything? You don't need a $1 million budget to do this shot right here. You don't need 1 million separate actors and a production team and this and that. You need a writer, a illustrator, and paper and pen. You don't even need that these days. You just need an iPad. You can do it on anything, and you can make something competent and something well done. And I think that this Ghost Machine experiment that they're doing, which, let's call it as it is, it's an imprint that they own at Image Comic Books, so that way they can have even more control over the characters. And that way they can have their own label that is not Image Comic Books to fall back on, in case they ever want to leave, in case they want to sell it. And it's a place where you can say, this is a Ghost Machine story, so come here. Because if they were to just say, we are all working together at Image Comic Books, then it would be a little bit different. This is just a cool branding. Fair play to them. They're trying to get their money. They're trying to do their money's worth. But I think for some guys who have been in comic books for as long as Jeff Johns has, who have the reputation as some of these artists have, I think that it's really underwhelming that this is what they put out. And I'm not trying to be overly critical. I'm not trying to be super cynical about the whole ordeal. It's just I feel like these guys took a lot of pretty good ideas with Redcoat, with Geiger, with some of these characters, and they are crushing their own ideas by way of making them made for TV, as I call it. Is that their plan? Probably. Jeff Johns is working with studios. All these guys are outside of DC and Marvel working with studios. But whenever you have guys like Jason Fabok, whenever you have guys like Francis Manipul, Ivan Reyes, and even Brian Hitch, and you put them in these worlds that they obviously care about. Jason Fabok's artwork, he's illustrating nature. He would have never done that in DC Comic Books. DC Comics would have never let him near that. And I think some of these artists who I fell out of favor with in their work, not literally, obviously, come back and they shine in these books. And they obviously have care, attention to detail, and a passion for what they're doing with these characters. And I think all of that makes these characters better to read than if they were back at DC. So all in all, this is something that I probably won't be buying very much of. I might tune into Rook. I might check back with the Rockefellers with Francis Manipul's work, just because I want to see these artists and writers grow. But there's only so much that they can grow if they continue to limit themselves to this made-for-TV storytelling. At the end of the day, comic books are over the top. Comic books might be a little goofy at times, might be a little cheesy, campy, but I think they all have the potential to lean into that if they lean out of stuff that you see on the evening television on ABC, TV programs. You want to stay away from that. These are comic books, and they'll turn into those other things if they succeed. The idea is that these comic books can't succeed without other media to back them. No. You're completely dead wrong. Comic books can absolutely succeed on their own if they're made well. And they will translate to those other mediums accordingly, but they will always come back to being good stories in good books. I think people are selling themselves short. I think they think there's some magical goose egg that they can find somewhere else, when in reality, comic book writers, comic book artists, they should be making good books at the end of the day. And I think that there's definitely the potential. I think these guys have the least potential of them all. They had some of the most mediocre stories, the most generic, boring dialogue that you hear everywhere. But when I read I Haven't Aged a Day since 1776, I mean, that's so corny, that's so campy, that's so cheesy, but it works because it's a book. If you guys want to go check this out, you know, it's only $5, 64 pages, gives you good introductions to all these characters. Go check it out. I'd say for $5, this book, out of all the books on the stands right now, is probably the best book for your money. Am I going to say that about each individual issue as it comes out? No, I honestly think they should publish it in a magazine format. I think that would serve to boost sales. I think that would drive interest, and that would get people reading all of these stories on a more regular basis than having to spend $15. Even if they upped it to 10, if they upped it to 10 for at least 3 stories per book, where it's a 64-page book for $10, but you're getting 3 separate characters, I think that would be a good deal. I don't know how things work up there, but at the end of the day, if they want comic books to work and they want the direct market to continue to succeed, they have to continue to give good ideas and let the good ideas breathe. Let the good ideas rest on their own and let these characters live. At the end of the day, these are just cartoons. But if you don't let these cartoons live, then they're never going to be good cartoons, you see? So that's my thoughts on the matter. I'll see you guys later, and I'll see you guys later.